The Unfinished Chapter. Chapter 1. The Shattered Bond. Ethan's world felt like it was crumbling around him. The walls of their small apartment, once a place of warmth and love, now felt suffocating. The argument with Claire echoed in his mind, each word a sharp knife twisting in his chest. He paced back and forth, replaying the fight over and over, trying to understand where things had gone so horribly wrong. Claire had always been independent, a free spirit who thrived on social interaction and adventure. It was one of the things Ethan had loved most about her. But over time, what had once been a source of admiration had become a point of contention. Ethan was more reserved, preferring quiet nights at home to the bustling energy of parties and gatherings. As the years passed, their differences became more pronounced, creating a rift that neither of them could bridge. The night Claire decided to go to that party, against Ethan's wishes, was the culmination of months of tension. He had asked her not to go, pleading with her to stay home so they could talk, so they could try to mend the cracks in their relationship. But Claire had been adamant, accusing him of being controlling, of trying to stifle her freedom. The words had stung more than Ethan cared to admit. When she left that night, slamming the door behind her, Ethan felt something inside him snap. He had always tried to be understanding, to give Claire the space she needed, but this felt like a betrayal. In his mind, she was choosing a party, choosing other people, over their marriage. It wasn't just about the party, it was about everything that had been festering between them. Ethan waited for her to return, expecting her to walk back through the door, apologize, and tell him that their relationship mattered more than a night out. But as the hours passed and dawn began to break, his hope dwindled. By the time the sun was fully up, Ethan had made a decision he never thought he would make. He packed a bag with the essentials, clothes, his laptop, a few personal items, and left the apartment. He didn't leave a note, didn't text or call her. He simply walked out of their life together, fueled by a mix of anger, hurt, and a desire to make her realize what she had lost. As he drove away from the city, he felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a sense of liberation, a feeling of taking control of a situation that had felt so out of his hands. But there was also a deep, aching sadness, a part of him that knew he was making a mistake, that he was running away instead of facing the problems head-on. But in that moment, the pain was too overwhelming, and the only thing he could think of was escape. Chapter 2. The New Life. Ethan found himself in a new city, far from the memories of his past. He rented a small apartment, smaller than the one he had shared with Claire, and started a new job at a local tech firm. The work was demanding, which was exactly what he wanted. The long hours kept his mind occupied, leaving little room for thoughts of Claire and the life he had left behind. He made new friends, colleagues who knew nothing of his past, who saw him as just another young professional trying to make his way in the world. To them, Ethan was a quiet, dependable worker, someone who kept to himself, but was always willing to lend a hand. They didn't know about the late nights he spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what Claire was doing, whether she missed him, whether she was angry or sad or relieved that he was gone. Ethan avoided social media, blocked anyone who might have a connection to Claire, and buried himself in his work. He told himself that this was the right decision, that they had been heading towards a breakup anyway, that Claire was better off without him. But no matter how hard he tried to convince himself, there was always a nagging doubt, a small voice in the back of his mind that whispered that he had made the wrong choice. Years passed, and Ethan slowly built a life for himself. He dated casually, but nothing ever felt serious. Every relationship ended the same way, with Ethan pulling away, unable to fully commit. He told himself that he wasn't ready, that he was still healing, but deep down, he knew the truth. He was still in love with Claire, still haunted by the memory of their last night together. He never stopped wondering what had happened to her. Had she moved on? Was she married now, with children, living the life they had once dreamed of? Or was she still searching for him, hoping for a chance to make things right? The questions gnawed at him, but he refused to seek out the answers. He told himself that it was better this way, that it was better to leave the past behind and focus on the future. Chapter 3. The Unexpected Return. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan returned to his apartment to find a letter waiting for him. There was no return address, just his name written in a familiar, delicate script. His heart pounded as he recognized the handwriting. It was Claire's. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The words blurred before his eyes as he read the first few lines. Claire had found him. She had been looking for him for years, searching for any trace of him, and finally, she had succeeded. She didn't write much, just that she was in town, and that she wanted to see him. She left a phone number and an address, asking if he would be willing to meet. Ethan sat down heavily on the couch, the letter clutched in his hands. His mind was racing. He had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to throw the letter away, to ignore it and continue living his life. But another part of him, the part that had never truly let go of Claire, knew that he couldn't walk away again. The next day, Ethan called the number in the letter. His heart was in his throat as the phone rang, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was the same, soft and musical, with a hint of nervousness that matched his own. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence heavy with all the unspoken words of the past. "It's Ethan," he finally said, his voice strained. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Ethan, I'm so glad you called. I wasn't sure if you would." "I wasn't sure either," he admitted. "But I think we need to talk." They agreed to meet at a small cafe near Claire's hotel. Ethan arrived early, his nerves on edge. He hadn't seen Claire in years, and he had no idea what to expect. Would she be angry? Sad? Had she moved on? Or was she still holding on to the past like he was? When Claire walked into the cafe, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She was as beautiful as he remembered, but there was something different about her, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She smiled nervously when she saw him, and Ethan felt a pang of longing that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. They sat down, the air between them heavy with unresolved emotions. For a moment they just stared at each other, neither of them knowing where to start. "You look well," Claire said finally, her voice hesitant. Ethan nodded, unable to find the words to respond. He was overwhelmed by the sight of her, by the flood of memories that came rushing back. "I've missed you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan felt his heart clench. "I've missed you too." The words hung in the air, both of them unsure of what to say next. Finally, Claire took a deep breath and began to speak. "I know I hurt you, Ethan. I know I made a terrible mistake that night. I shouldn't have gone to that party, and I should have listened to you. But when I came back and found you gone, I didn't know what to do. I searched everywhere for you, tried to contact everyone we knew, but you had disappeared." Ethan looked down at his hands, guilt gnawing at him. "I didn't want to be found. I was angry, and I thought leaving would make you realize what you had done, but I didn't think about how much it would hurt you, too." Claire reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I deserved it. I was selfish, and I didn't think about how my actions would affect you. I've had a lot of time to think about everything, and I realized that I was wrong. I let my pride get in the way, and I lost the most important person in my life because of it." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes searching hers. "Why now, Claire? Why after all these years?" "Because I couldn't move on," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I tried, but I couldn't. You were always there, in the back of my mind, in my heart. I needed to find you, to tell you that I'm sorry, and to see if there's any chance we can try again." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He had spent years convincing himself that he had moved on, that he didn't need closure, but hearing Claire's words, he realized how much he had missed her, how much he had buried his feelings to protect himself. "I don't know if we can go back to what we were," he said honestly. "Too much has happened. We're not the same people anymore." Claire nodded, her tears spilling over. "I know, but maybe we can be something new. Maybe we can learn from our mistakes and try to be better for each other." Ethan looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. The anger that had fueled him for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of longing and hope. Could they really start over? Could they build something new from the ashes of their past? "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm willing to try." Claire let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. "That's all I'm asking." Chapter 4. Rebuilding the Bridge. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions as Ethan and Claire tentatively navigated their way back into each other's lives. They met regularly, sometimes for coffee, other times for long walks through the city, talking about their lives apart and the people they had become. The conversations were often difficult, laden with the weight of their shared history, but there was also a sense of rediscovery, of learning to understand each other in new ways. Ethan learned that after he left, Claire had gone through a dark period. She had struggled with guilt and loneliness, trying to fill the void he had left with distractions that never quite worked. She had dated, but no one had ever made her feel the way Ethan did. Eventually, she had thrown herself into her career, becoming a successful event planner. But even that hadn't been enough to erase the pain of losing him. For Ethan, hearing about Claire's struggles stirred a mix of emotions. He felt guilty for the pain he had caused her, but also relieved to know that he hadn't been the only one who had suffered. Their conversations helped him see things from her perspective, and slowly, his anger began to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding of the mistakes they had both made. As they spent more time together, Ethan found himself falling for Claire all over again. But it wasn't the same love he had felt before. It was something deeper, more mature, born from the lessons they had learned and the scars they both carried. Claire, too, seemed to feel the change. There was a gentleness to her now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. One evening, after a particularly emotional conversation, Claire invited Ethan to her hotel room for dinner. They ordered room service and spent the evening talking and laughing, reminiscing about the good times they had shared. As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted, becoming more intimate. They sat on the couch, close enough to touch, the unspoken tension between them growing with each passing minute. Ethan hesitated, unsure of whether to cross the line that had kept them apart for so long. But Claire reached out, gently placing her hand on his cheek, her eyes searching his for permission. In that moment, all of the walls Ethan had built around his heart crumbled, and he leaned in, capturing her lips in a soft, tender kiss. It was like coming home. The kiss deepened, and all of the years of pain and longing melted away as they lost themselves in each other. That night, they made love for the first time in years, a physical and emotional reunion that sealed the bond they were rebuilding. As they lay in each other's arms afterward, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that they still had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Chapter 5. The Path Forward. Over the next few months, Ethan and Claire worked hard to rebuild their relationship. They attended couples therapy, where they confronted the issues that had driven them apart. They learned to communicate better, to listen to each other's needs, and to compromise in ways they hadn't before. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when old wounds threatened to reopen, but they faced each challenge together, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Ethan eventually invited Claire to move in with him, a decision that marked a significant step in their reconciliation. Claire accepted, and they began to build a new life together, blending their routines and finding a new rhythm as a couple. The apartment that had once felt empty and lonely now felt warm and alive with Claire's presence. They decorated it together, filling the space with memories of their journey back to each other. As they settled into their new life, they started talking about the future, about the possibility of marriage, of starting a family. These conversations were tentative at first, laced with the fears and insecurities that had once torn them apart. But as time passed, their confidence in each other grew, and the discussions became more concrete. One evening, as they were sitting on the couch, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Claire's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a beautiful diamond ring. "Claire," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know we've been through a lot, and I know the future is uncertain, but I love you. I've always loved you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building the future we always dreamed of. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Claire's eyes as she looked at the ring, then back at Ethan. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, both of them overcome with emotion. It was a moment of pure joy, a symbol of their commitment to each other and the life they were building together. We're to Chapter 6. A New Beginning. Ethan and Claire's wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended only by close friends and family. It wasn't the grand celebration they had once imagined, but it was perfect in its simplicity. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, both of them felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. They had come so far, overcome so much, and now they were finally starting a new chapter together. In the years that followed, Ethan and Claire built a life filled with love, laughter, and growth. They supported each other's dreams, celebrated each other's successes, and stood by each other during the difficult times. Their relationship wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. But it was strong, built on a foundation of trust, communication, and mutual respect. They eventually welcomed a daughter, a beautiful little girl, who brought even more joy into their lives. As they watched her grow, Ethan and Claire felt an even deeper connection to each other, bonded by the love they shared for their child and the life they had created together. Ethan often thought about the years they had spent apart, the pain and the loneliness, and he realized that those experiences had made them who they were. They had both made mistakes, but they had also learned from them, and in the end, they had found their way back to each other. As they sat on the porch of their home one evening, watching their daughter play in the yard, Claire leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever regret what happened?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No," he said. "It wasn't easy, but it brought us to where we are now. And I wouldn't trade this for anything." Claire smiled, her heart swelling with love for the man beside her. "Neither would I." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset, content in the knowledge that they had found their way back to each other. Their story had taken many twists and turns, but in the end, they had written their own happy ending, a new beginning filled with love, hope, and the promise of a future together.